invited him to sit at the table and to eat. And the prince offered the storyteller the bowl of fruit, but the storyteller didn't want to eat because, as you know, if you're storytelling, you really don't want to be. It's not a good look, spraying food at people. But the storyteller noticed the cherry stones on the prince's plate. And there were 8 of them. And he was reminded of a childhood rhyme that he remembered that went, tinker,
soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief.
And he said, Your Highness, I am here to remind you of what it is to be a real man, whether you are tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief. And the prince said, Well, you needn't bother with tinker, because you are clearly the tinker. You travel the kingdom patching up empty vessels, so we can dispense with tinker. So tell me a tale of tailor. Of tailor, said the storyteller. Can I tell you a story of a man who sews, at least? Not quite a tailor. He's a craftsman and he sews, and, Your Highness, I tell you this story because you heard it when you were a child, and I know this because your mother told me. And, Your Highness, this story will teach you what it is to live in love and in concord with a wife, and to depend upon your wife and she to depend upon you, and to live together and grow old together. And to tell this story, I must take us to the capital of our great kingdom. And you know, in the capital there are fashionable parts and there are parts that are not so fashionable, where there is a street that once was fashionable. And it had shops all the way down it where the great men and women would promenade and go in and buy trinkets, jewels, hats, and shoes. And there was a cobbler who made his fortune upon that street, but as we know, fashions come and fashions go, and the cobbler's shop is still there on the street that is now unfashionable, but instead of being full of beautiful shoes, there is one plank in the window on which there is one pair of shoes. And there it must stay for 4 days before the shoes are bought. When the shoes are bought, that is when the cobbler and his dear wife can go shopping and buy food. And all they can afford is bread and cheese and some ale. For the rest of the money must pay for leather. Enough leather to make another pair of shoes that can then go in the window and wait for 4 or 5 days before they're bought, and then they can go. You get the idea. The cobbler and his dear wife had fallen on hard times. Well, one day they sold a pair of shoes. They took the money and they went shopping. The cobbler bought enough leather to make another pair of shoes. His wife bought bread and cheese and ale, and they went back home. And the light was fading, so the cobbler did not start work immediately. He simply laid the leather out on his workbench, and he went into the parlour with his wife where she served the food. And they ate their simple repast, and then they went to bed. Now, I don't know which of you here live in old houses, but if you've ever lived or slept in an old house, you will know that old houses breathe. They make noises. When they cool down, they make noises. When they warm up, they make noises. And in the night, they can be very noisy indeed. And so this old cobbler's shop, as it cooled down in the night, creaked and groaned, so that the cobbler and his wife, who were fast asleep in bed as they had been every night since their wedding day, and they did not hear the noises coming from the workshop. In the morning they came down for a simple breakfast of porridge. And the cobbler left his wife cleaning the dishes, and he went into the workshop, and where he had left the single piece of leather, there was now
A pair of shoes.
A pair of shoes, but not just a pair of shoes. The stitching was so fine, so beautiful. There was so much detail in the carving of the leather and the cutting and the gluing. The shoes were perfect. So the cobbler went to put them in the window, but his wife had heard him exclaiming. She'd come running in. She'd seen the shoes and she said, "Oh no, they are not going on a plain plank in the window." She went back into the parlour. She went to the cobbler's own chair where he sat in the evening watching the flames of the fire, and she took the cushion from it. And then she went to their bedroom, and in the wardrobe was a memory of happier and richer times. A waistcoat the cobbler used to wear, made of silk. And with a heavy heart she cut it up and made one half of a cushion cover. And on that cushion she placed the shoes and put them in the window. I told you the street was unfashionable, but it was still a shortcut. Those shoes were not in the window for 4 days. They were not in the window for 4 hours. Within the hour they were sold, and not just for the price of one piece of leather that could make two shoes, to make one pair, but enough leather to make 2 pairs of shoes. They went shopping. They bought enough leather to make 2 pairs of shoes, and they bought their bread.
Cheese.
And what else? Meat, but come on, what? Non-specific meat of a sort of sausage kind. It's not going to require that. Can we be a little more specific? Steak! They were expensive shoes. They were rich. And steak. And that night they ate well. And the cobbler didn't bother going to his bench. He simply left the leather out. And the next morning when they came down, they didn't even bother with porridge. They went straight into the workshop, and there on the workbench were 2 shoes. Well, I think we get the idea. Cushion, window, sale, more money. 2 to the end. That's where we can do it. We can do the mathematical bit later, okay? So enough leather now to buy? 4. To make 4 pairs of shoes, and we've got bread, cheese, steak. Bananas! That would have been exotic. Would they have known what to do with them?
It goes well with porridge.
No, it doesn't. No, really, it doesn't. Honestly. Okay, bananas. And of course, that night they went to bed, and when they got up in the morning, there were 4 pairs of shoes, and this went on, and their business was restored, and the street may have been unfashionable when they started, but after a few weeks, the street was starting to come alive, because people knew that the cobbler's shop sold the most magnificent shoes, with the most perfect, tiny, detailed stitching, and the most beautiful cut. And so, one night, they didn't go to bed. Curiosity got the better of them, and they waited with the door ajar from the parlour to the workshop, and in the depths of the night they saw 2 tiny, naked men enter the workshop. And the tiny men worked with such speed and such precision and created beautiful shoes. The secret was known. And so the next day when they sold, well, what was it, sorry? What was the equation? 2 to the n. 2 to the n. 2 to the n number of shoes. And they had enough. Yes. So that they could then make 2 to the n plus 1 number of shoes. Yes. The next time. The cobbler's wife went and bought some silk and took it home. And made 2 tiny suits. Waistcoats, they're naked, come on, decency. Waistcoats, really?
I thought she was in the middle.
She made them tiny suits of clothes and left them by the leather. And then they waited, crack between the parlour and the workshop. And in the depths of the night, they saw the 2 naked men who went up to the workbench, ready to start work as usual, and they saw the suits of clothes. They looked at each other. They got dressed in their little suits of clothes. They looked at each other. They danced around each other. And then they jumped from the bench and ran out of the door, and the cobbler and his wife never saw them again. And the storyteller said, "You see, my lord, what devotion can bring. They worked together, they lived together, they supported each other. This is a story about marriage, my lord." And the prince said, "Possibly." Or is it a story about controlling the means of production? And when you see your workers naked, perhaps not being too generous, else they leave you, and leave you with no means of income. And the storyteller smiled and looked at the cherry stones and said, perhaps we will move on from the tailor. Sorry? Soldier. Tell me a tale of a soldier, said the prince. And the story